All right, we have a lady who's an American and a fellow Texan, but was born in South Africa. Lara Logan, famous, incredible investigative journalist. LaraLogan.com, at Lara Logan on X. Joining us, you can find her popular podcast reports there. There's so much I'd love to ask her about. She's got so much on the border and globalism and the deep state. Also, we've only got her for about 20 minutes. Lara, you're watching, obviously, this incredible controversy, Trump being demonized, bringing in 8,000 Afrikaners, and the left calling them white supremacists and saying that they deserve to basically be killed. The Episcopal Church head saying, we don't help white people, they're bad. I mean, the Soros advising all of this. There's a lot of ignorance here by Democrat constituency. We know their leadership is heavily involved creating the communist state that is South Africa now, taking a beautiful, wonderful country and ruining it. But you're really more of an expert on this than I. Thanks for joining us. We got a few minutes to break, but just give us your synopsis of what's really going on.
Well, Alex, we're in an odd situation where there's no question that white farmers in South Africa are being murdered, at incredible rates. The murders are not just, they're not just getting shot. The murders are very violent, and many people are being tortured. And for some reason, there are political forces today that just want to deny that white farmers are in trouble. And it's not just that they're being murdered. It's that there are so many racist laws on the books. And of course, now the South African government has said that they're going to expropriate the land, take the land back without any kind of compensation. Well, South Africa has 30,000 commercial farmers, roughly. You take those people out of production, and I can promise you we know exactly what's going to happen because we saw it happen in Zimbabwe, which is across the border. It is that people will starve. Zimbabwe had about 5,000 white commercial farmers when they went after the land. Okay, and inflation went to like 800, 900%, and most of the population descended into poverty. Okay, South Africa, think about it, 30,000 in comparison. Now, the point that people will make is that the violence in South Africa is unbelievable and that many people suffer from this. It's not just white farmers. And that is true. There is an unacceptable level of violence across South Africa. But to deny that white farmers specifically are not being targeted is just, it's frankly ridiculous. If you ask any white farmer, I've been out there, I am South African born and raised, and obviously American now, as you pointed out. But if you go out there to their farms and to their ranches, they have security systems. They have installed systems where they can go to help each other because they know that nobody else is coming. And what happens is when, you can imagine when you go to a farm in the middle of nowhere, what happens? People can come in and they can take their time. So they boil people alive. They gang rape, women in their 80s. There is so much evidence of the atrocities that have been carried out, but the forces that want to deny that there is, legitimate political asylum for people who are being targeted because of their race, these people say, they don't care. You can come into this country if you're LGBT, right? If you claim to be transgender and you claim that someone in your country, doesn't.
So, Lara, you've got the floor for the rest of the 20 minutes we have. Thank you so much. You're the expert. Tell us where this is going, what you think's coming next. This is just amazing.
Well, Alex, it's very interesting to hear you recap the history there. Obviously, it's very personal for me. I grew up in South Africa. I am not an Afrikaner. South Africans, white South Africans are pretty much divided between those whose ancestors came from Europe, that were English speaking. Mine came from Sicily and from Ireland and Scotland. And then you have the Afrikaners who are really descendants of the Dutch. And so, what's very interesting about the Afrikaans people, and I'm not really sure that most of the world understands this, they don't exist anywhere else. So because of race, and we say that you can't have an African tribe that isn't black. Well, the Afrikaners are really a tribe. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's just how it is. And they happen to be white. There's nowhere else in the world where their language is spoken. Their entire history is rooted in that land. They are born of that soil. And the reason they are still in South Africa, remember, the South Africa's government changed in 1994. That's when Nelson Mandela was voted into power. And you got the first black president on, by the way, a platform of unity, which couldn't be further removed than the politics, the racial politics of today, which is designed, this is the Marxist style politics of division, right? Disrupt, divide, destroy. So when Nelson Mandela was took over, and the first black government, the first real election was held in South Africa that was open to all races, one man, one vote, and so on. Those people did not leave South Africa. There were some that left, but the farmers, these are the ones who are most attached to the land. As in, many countries in the world, it's often the case with farmers. But these are people who really don't want to give up everything, to give up their identity, to give up their traditions, and to sever their roots and come halfway across the world to the United States of America. If they did, they would have done it a long time ago. But you know what they also don't want, Alex, and what they don't want more? They don't want to be butchered in their homes. They don't want to, and excuse me, but this is what happens. They don't want to be boiled alive and have their skin peeled off and be gang raped and forced to watch their loved ones being tortured and murdered. They don't want to do that. And for some reason, there is a level of violence attached to the farm murders that is, that is kind of beyond the pale. It's something you can't even imagine. Now, to call these people white supremacists is truly and utterly ridiculous. I'm just going to say to you, South Africa has a population of around 40 million. I might be a little outdated with that, but the white population isn't more than 5 million. So, when you think about racial politics in the United States of America, there are towns in America that are still completely white just because of demographics, because in spite of all the lies, the population of whites in the United States is still around 70%. Now, the population of black people in this country is around 13%. You wouldn't think so watching TV and watching the commercials. You'd think every second person was black and every other person was gay. But that's actually not the reality when you look at the demographics. Well, South Africa is very different to that. You have a much more integrated lifestyle because just based on the population dynamics, everybody's lives are much more integrated. So this idea that, every white South African farmer is a white supremacist is really dishonest. It's profoundly dishonest. But more than that, it's a political agenda. And what's quite incredible to me is the goal, right? The goal of the Democrats and the progressive Marxists on the left, who are using this as an opportunity to once again try to revive the same old Charlottesville narrative, and say that this is proof that Trump is a racist. This is quite frankly the politics of and information warfare that is at play here. Because these are the very same people that say, if you can't get a job in your country because of the cartels, you're welcome to come to the United States of America. You can just waltz in here and you're just fine. And if you want to come in the millions, right, in the millions, if you want to come from, if the Chinese want to send their hackers and their spies and their military operatives across the border, we have no problem with that. We're just going to open up the border to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. We've got more terrorists that have come across. I think I don't remember exactly, but it's 150%. It's a staggering number of terrorists that came up across the border under the Biden administration. And those are only the ones that have been identified and that they acknowledge came across the border. The real numbers, if you talk to anyone in counterterrorism and anyone in Border Patrol and anyone in Customs and Border Protection, and I mean, it's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous that the real numbers are so much higher. So, we've seen this over and over again. We see that, if they can attach something to Trump, they'll say, oh my gosh, Trump doesn't care about kids. The fact that they don't care that hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors came across the border, that doesn't matter. And when you're talking about the white farmers in South Africa, you are quite right that they produce most of the food in South Africa. There are around 30,000 commercial farms. This is not just a case of farmers being attacked and murdered. This is a case of hundreds, literally hundreds of race-based laws that are on the books in South Africa that discriminate against white people. Okay, so basically, if you're not going to grow your own your own food, and you're not going to farm the land, your options in South Africa to survive are smaller and smaller and smaller. You're not going to get a government job. You're not going to, you're not going to be favored for a bank loan. You're going to really struggle if you don't have your own money to get a company started. I mean, you really, entrepreneurship is probably your number one option. But if you're Black, you get preferential access to universities and education, and so on. Now, other people will say to counter that the vast majority of the wealth is still held in the hands of white South Africans. I don't know if the vast majority, if that's even true anymore. The problem is, as we have seen over and over again throughout history, that when you have a government that takes office and they are not running on sound policies, but they start to steal the resources from the people. And when they run out of things to steal, they always go for the land. And so what they will say to you now, when Nelson Mandela was elected, he said there would be no land would be taken without compensation. He said Black and white together. He preached a message of unity. All of the fathers of the revolution in South Africa, whether it was Thabo Mbeki or Archbishop Desmond Tutu or many of these famous people, right, that although they were Marxist in their past, because Marxism always found those openings of division inside the society and exploited them. But when they came to power in South Africa, what did they create? They created a flag that was called, that had all the colors of the old flag, the new flag, the ANC, the African National Congress, the party of the dominant party in South Africa, Nelson Mandela's party. They created a rainbow flag for the Rainbow Nation. Because South Africa has, it has more than 19 official languages. I think there's something like 30 tribes. I mean, there's a massive amount of different traditions and identities that make up the nation of South Africa. But what all the leaders recognize, both Black and white, and by the way, Indian, and there's another main ethnic group, the Coloreds. And these are the descendants of the Malay people. These are the Bushmen, the Khoi people that came from the Kalahari Desert. So these are your main groups, right? What did they all agree on? That united, South Africa was stronger and better. Why did they not go to a full-blown civil war? Because you had great leaders, really, truly great leaders. Nelson Mandela was one of the greatest leaders that has ever walked the earth, who said, we are stronger together. He did not want to inherit ashes. And part of not inheriting ashes is inheriting the farms that are functioning and that feed not only South Africa.
Let's talk about this, though. We have Rhodesia to the north, which explain what Mugabe did there. Because this is being repeated. And then we go to, how did the communists get in? Why now has the country, from what we've seen, the numbers, one of the most dangerous, hellish places on earth now. And it used to be very, very nice. My wife's not that old. She did part of her college thing was a year in South Africa studying abroad. She said it was awesome, but not now.
Well, Alex, so you threw a couple of things in there. I mentioned Zimbabwe. You called it Rhodesia. It was called Rhodesia when it was still ruled by the British. It was a British colony. And then after independence, the name was changed to Zimbabwe. Now, I had many relatives in Zimbabwe when I was growing up. And of course, in Zimbabwe, they had a very, very bloody civil war between the two main tribes in Zimbabwe, right? First, there was a war against the British, of course, for independence, but there was a war that followed that between the Shona people and the Matabele people. And then, Zimbabwe, before that, when it was under the British, was known as the breadbasket of Africa. The farmland there is very, very rich. The farmers were very successful. But, but what happened was when Robert Mugabe, the longtime leader of Zimbabwe, when he ran out of things to steal, he created these groups of army veterans. They called them veterans. Really, they were just violent mobs of enforcers. And what did they do? They went from farm to farm to farm. They took the land without paying for it, without compensation, which is land appropriation without compensation, which is exactly what the South African government has now said that it's going to do. And it has passed a law allowing it to do that. And they took those farms. So I went as a journalist. And now you were not allowed to go in as journalists at that time. Mugabe was clamping down. So I flew to South Africa. I was living in London. I got a South African I hired a guy from South Africa to be my, boyfriend, so we could be a multiracial couple. And I pretended that I was just a tourist. And I went from house to house to house. We were chased by the security police. It was a very dangerous time. And I can tell you what happened then, because I know. I was there and I saw it firsthand. These groups of thugs went and stole the land. The first thing they would do was find the foreman at the farm, because the foreman was almost always black. And they would make the farm workers murder the foreman. So he would be tortured and he would be murdered. And then they would make them go to the neighboring farm and they would make them kill people there. And they would go from farm to farm to farm. It was one of the most brutal, cruel, vindictive campaigns.
And Mugabe backed it, but claimed he wasn't behind it, but would never prosecute. And now the ruling group in South Africa, I've seen the speeches, they openly on TV, they say, oh, good, it's good to kill the Afrikaners. It's good, kill them. Yep. And they say on the stage, we're going to kill them.
Kill the Boer.
That's the chant that you played. They go, kill the Fama, kill the Boer, kill the Fama, kill the Boer. And they chant like this. And I've been in those stadiums. Let me tell you, when they chant that, you feel the earth move, because there is an African dance, the toi toi, and they go, kill the Fama. And then they go, kill the Boer. And when they pound the earth like that, it is unbelievable. And I say this to you because if you're a young person in South Africa, or you're a person who's lived in poverty and you have nothing, they are playing on your emotions. Okay, they're trying to drum up this emotion, which makes people go out and do things. They don't just go and steal the farm. They don't just go and steal the gun or ask for money. That's when they go and they really carry out extreme violence. And, I do want to say that the ANC, the ruling party of South Africa, which now has a coalition government in the last election because they've been doing a worse and worse and worse job. The infrastructure of South Africa is falling apart. There's load sharing for electricity where, your electricity goes off for a few hours every day. There's basically the country is descending into poverty. And that breaks my heart, because I was a big proponent of the end of apartheid, liberty and justice for all, and I still believe in all of that. But Alex, let me tell you something. You want to know where the Open Society, George Soros' Open Society, has one of its oldest offices in the world?
Right there in South Africa. It's on record that they're down there stirring this up.
And you know what? You know who Obama's, who his ambassador to South Africa was? A man called Patrice Gaspard, who came from Haiti. And when Patrice Gaspard was recalled at the end of the Obama administration, you know where Obama put him? As the president of the Open Society Foundations. And he was there in charge of that operation until Lord Malik Brown from Smartmatic, George Soros' other pal, helped him steal the 2020 election. And for his reward, he came and replaced Patrice Gaspard as president of the Open Society Foundations. And anybody can go and look that up. It's not a secret. So, and what you have essentially in South Africa is very much, if you want to know how this began, well, Vladimir Lenin, when he was ruling Russia, he sent his emissaries all over the world to identify openings in those societies that could be exploited. Right. So in South Africa, it was very obviously raced. So the ANC, the party of Nelson Mandela and the ruling party, they really had their origins and roots in Marxism. But I don't believe it's really because they were Marxists. I mean, obviously they were Marxist, but it's not so much that the heart and soul of every South African, every black South African is Marxism.
They got into.
And they poured money into it, Alex. They poured money into it. And so that's what funded the revolution in South Africa. But look at what happened when the war was an end was negotiated and Mandela came out of prison. Did they embrace a Marxist system of government? No, they did not. They embraced capitalism. They embraced a unity form of government. They embraced democracy.
So explain how it all fell apart. We know the Open Society and Soros and all of them helped go in there and wreck it.
Well, they're still pushing Marxism, because if you look at Julius Malema is the controversial leader, he's the one who's leading all the chants. Look at his party, right? It's like an information warfare operation. He gets everybody to wear red, which is the color of Marxism, right? He gets them to all dress the same. He's done stunts like having them go into the parliament and wear, say if they were a domestic worker before, or they worked at a gas station or whatever, that they wear the uniforms of the worker, right? Trying to create this image of them as the Workers' Party. Julius Malema is, he's got more money than God, right? He's not, like with all Marxist leaders, he's not living on the poverty line. Okay, he knows exactly what he's doing. You see him with the red beret, which, is the Che Guevara beret. I mean, nobody even looks at Che Guevara, that he was a murderer and he wasn't some romantic revolutionary figure.
Let me ask you.
Yeah, they romanticize all of that. And that is an information operation that is completely and utterly by design, right? And so when you look at this, you can see the fingerprints of the Open Society Foundation and this radical Marxist globalist takeover, because you see the hatred of Jews, right? You see the South African government aligning itself against Israel with the Iranians, and it's all money related because the ANC had huge debt. And the Iranians cleared the debts, right? And that's, lo and behold, there you have the ANC going to the International Criminal Court and making statements against Israel.
How is this going to end? I mean, you have to predict where South Africa is going.
So first of all, I always tell you I'm not a prophet, right? I don't make predictions. So I don't do that. But what I can tell you is it's very obvious that the fate of South Africa is tied to the fate of the United States, just like Europe and so on. Because these forces that are creating this division in South Africa, it's very easy to incite people with emotional chants when you're creating a boogeyman, right, for somebody to hate. And what you hear now in South Africa, you hear about DEI and you hear about, slavery and oppression and all the rest of it. You hear all the language, the same language that is repeated, the language of George Floyd. That is the language of the Open Society and people in South Africa. So if it's not defeated in the United States of America, if Donald Trump and his administration do not hold people accountable here, they will continue to do this all over the world. They will keep murdering white South Africans until there are none left. Those who have not fled are dead.
I mean, they got Democrats saying they're going to come after these poor farmers that are coming here. So it's all the same propaganda. It's the same operation. You're 100% right.
Same people, same objectives, and not only that, Alex, but what you have in South Africa is, Nelson Mandela and the ANC led a very noble revolution. And their slogan was education before liberation, right? I'm sorry, liberation before education. Liberation came before everything. And what that did was it left people as unskilled and uneducated. And so when the change of government happened, there was really a lot riding on the performance of the South African government. And that's why if you look at the ANC, they voted along party lines and tribal lines and
hold on. I think you've got to go, but we got to go to break. Maybe you can come back and finish up on this because this is really important. We'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, I've got this tyranny alert coming up here in about 10 minutes with Lara Logan, famous, amazing, patriot journalist, LaraLogan.com, at Lara Logan on X, of course, has her very popular, informative, Going Rogue podcast. I don't want to spend all our time on South Africa and what's happening on that because she knows so much more about all the other things, the Trump administration and the wars and the trade deals and Ukraine and Israel and Iran, all of it. But as she's saying, and she stole my thunder because I was going there to ask her that, you read the stuff coming out of the communist government of, that's what I call them, of South Africa and all the race-based stuff. I mean, it is like right out of a liberal college here in the U.S. And that's because it's the globalist NGOs that are in their programming at Soros, chief amongst them. And it's exactly what they want to do here and in Europe. And then you've got these pundits on CNN, MSNBC saying Trump's a racist, there's no white genocide, these white farmers are bad. They're going to come here and be mean to black people, and Don Lemon's got black farmers on. I mean, this is really open anti-white, Hitler level stuff from the other perspective. And the left is doubling down on this, despite the fact that people are rejecting it everywhere, including record numbers of blacks and Hispanics supporting Trump, and they admit the political realignment. Trump is now the blue-collar populist for everybody. The Democrats have lost that. So they're not course correcting. So moving back to domestic, tying it to South Africa, and then any other points on South Africa, because I want to talk about that. But just in general, what do you make of the Democrats viciously, just across the spectrum, seizing on this for racial division, even though most people see through it?
It's desperation, Alex. On the one hand, it's real desperation because the fact that this is happening and it's not working for them and they're still sticking with it shows you that if they had another line of operation that was more successful, they would just shift and lift. So when they stick to a line of operation that's losing for them, like Kamala Harris was losing for them, right? Joe Biden was losing for them. I mean, they shift and lift because they know they're going to lose. One important point that I need to make about the white farmers in South Africa, these are the same people in a sense. When you think about people that came from Europe that founded the United States of America, well, that's exactly what happened. People went from Europe and they founded the South African colony, right? You had French Huguenots and Afrikaners first, and then the British came. But these farmers didn't throw people off the land. When they went and set up their homesteads and began farming that land, it had never belonged to anybody else. Nobody else had a title. They didn't take it. So when you talk about, we're going to expropriate the land, we're going to take it without compensation, who are you going to give it to? Because in Zimbabwe, as you pointed out, formerly Rhodesia across the north, when it ended up happening, they gave it to cronies of the government. And so the land never, ever, ever gets farmed. It doesn't ever yield what it was yielding before. And also, most of the people it gets given to come from the cities. They go out to these farms in the middle of nowhere. They don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere. They don't know how to farm, and to be a farmer, you have to be
South Africa, but I've read a lot of books on it and watched shows. I always found it fascinating. And all the South African folks I've met have been really cool, both, Afrikaners and people mainly with the English background. But there was nothing out there except a few warring tribes, and you'd go by wagon for weeks before you even saw an African village. There's just lions and cobras running around, and then these hardy people, the same ones that went all over the world doing this, again, Protestants fleeing persecution, went and literally carved something out of nothing, and then you see population going up around it. You see Africans wanting to move to South Africa, because these farmers had come in with Christianity and stabilized things.
Yes, and of course, the system of apartheid, you can't whitewash that history and pretend that apartheid didn't happen, but you can't pretend that there weren't racist laws. It was a system of keeping the races apart, and the Afrikaners and the Dutch Reformed Church were, primarily proponents of that. They were very conservative. And so where did the whole sort of revolution really kind of take root was more in English-speaking South Africa. But there were many Afrikaners that were also involved in the revolution that fought side by side with black people in South Africa and English-speaking white people for this. So I don't want to paint this as a racist group. But this is a group who literally, their language isn't spoken. The language of Afrikaans isn't spoken anywhere else in the world. There is nowhere else. So they're very, very attached to the land. And although there have been people, who are more urban, who have migrated to other parts of the world, the farmers were the last people who wanted to leave because they come to the United States and they have nothing here. They have to start from scratch. And a lot of the farmers, when you go to their farms, they're not very wealthy. The farmhouses are not very up to date. They're not luxurious because to be a farmer, you have to be a diplomat. You have to be a manager. You have to be a weatherman. You have to be able to negotiate with the banks. You have to be able to manage your crops, manage your finances. I mean, there's a lot more involved in farming than just
real farmers. Grassroots farmers are never wealthy, but they're happy, and that's the thing. They're the first. I mean, I don't have the history you do knowing it, but they've been there for 400 years. They're the first white people there. The British came in; they had a big war with them, and so they're more territorial, and they see it as theirs. And there was nothing there when they got there other than lions and a couple of Zulus running by. And so the Africa we see today with this giant population was not there before.
No, and don't forget two important things. Number one, the first concentration camps ever built in the world were built by the British in South Africa for the Afrikaners. They didn't put African people, they didn't go and put all the Zulus and Xhosas and Sotus and, all the other tribes. They didn't put them in concentration camps. They put the Boers, the Afrikaners, and they were absolutely what they did to them in those concentration camps, they starved them, many of them to death, right? And so, and that's a very important part of the history that nobody wants to talk about, because the narrative created by the Marxists and the globalists is that, white people never suffered anywhere. Never mind the Irish slaves, never mind all the white slaves, no, we're not allowed to talk about that. So that's one thing. The other part of it is that just like they want to pretend that white people didn't do anything and didn't build anything and didn't contribute anything, whether you like their politics or not, whether you like their religious views or not, the reality is that the Afrikaners feed so many people across Southern Africa, and that if you get rid of those farms and you don't give them to people who are actually going to make them productive and keep farming them, then in addition to all the poverty that you have in the urban areas, I am so afraid for South Africa, because I know that millions of people are going to starve.